In the last video, we talked about functions and the definition of a function, and we primarily looked at different relations, so lists of ordered pairs. In this video, we're going to continue with exploring the idea of a function, but we're going to look at some equations and examine whether or not these equations would be functions or not. So in Math 125, we primarily study three types of equations. So we study linear equations, quadratic, and exponential. And just to give you an idea of what I mean by these, a linear function might look like, y equals x plus 1, or a linear equation. A quadratic equation might look like y equals 2x squared. And an exponential equation might look like y equals 3 to the x, where the variable x is in the exponent location. And so all of these equations are all functions, because every time you plug an x value into the equation, you get a single y value as a result. So if you think about like this linear equation, for example, whatever number you plug in for x, you're just going to add 1 to it, and then that's going to give you y. So there's no other, whatever number you plug in for x, you're always just going to get 1 y as a result. Or if we look at the quadratic equation here, y equals 2x squared. If we put a number in for x, we're just going to square that number, which gives us one result, and multiply it by 2, which gives us one result for y. And then lastly, if we think about this exponential equation, y equals 3 to the x, we're just going to take the number 3 and raise it to whatever value x is, and that's going to give us y. And so when we take 3 and raise it to a power, there's only one result that can come about. So all of those are considered functions. There are equations, though, that are not functions, and so we'll look at one of those down below. So let's check out example 4. These are examples of functions, since every possible inputted x value will lead to exactly one y value. So a, b, and c, we've got some equations. And let's go ahead and start with a. So we've got linear equation y equals 4x minus 8, plug in x equals 6. So that just means we're going to plug in a 6 for x, and we're going to evaluate. So we end up getting y equals 24 minus 8. And that gives us 16. And so we can see that if we plug in 6 for x, we end up getting 16 for y, and so since that one x value 6 goes to just one y value 16, then that's proof here that we have a function. And I shouldn't say it's proof that we have a function. It's always possible that there's maybe another x value that we plug in that gives us two y values. But if we just think about this, there's no number that we could plug in for x, so that when you multiply it by 4 and subtract 8, you're going to get two different numbers just by the nature of multiplying and subtracting. Let's look at the second example. So if we look at this quadratic equation, y equals 3x squared minus 8, we're going to plug in x equals 6. So I'm just going to write y equals 3 times 6 squared minus 8. And that gives us 3 times 36 minus 8. And if we plug that all into our calculator, we get 3 times 36 minus 8. And we end up getting 100. So again, if we think about what's going on here, we're plugging in one x, we're getting one y out, and that would be true for any x value we plug in, because when we square a number, we're only getting one result. And then lastly, if we look at this exponential equation, let's look at this and plug in 3 for x. So we get y equals 2 times 1.03 to the third power. And so let's plug that into our calculator. So we're just going to plug it in exactly how it looks here on the paper. So 2 parenthesis 1.03, and then we're going to press this caret key, which brings us up to that exponent location, and then 3, and so we end up getting 2.185454. And same with the other examples. When we plug in our x value, in this case it's 3, we end up getting one y value. And so this is also a function. So let's look at an example where we have an equation that's not a function. So in this last part here, we've got y squared equals x. So let's think about this for a minute. So y squared equals x. Let's say x is 1. So if x is 1, let's think about what y values, what numbers, when we square them, give us 1. Well, there are actually two options. We could plug in a 1 and square it. 1 squared, 1 times 1 is equal to 1. So that works. So that means when x is 1, y is 1. If we take negative 1 and square it, that means negative 1 times negative 1. That's also equal to 1. So that means if y is negative 1, x is 1. And so what we see here is that the x value 1 goes with two y values. The x value 1 could go with y equals 1, and it can also go with y equals negative 1. And so since that same x value goes to two different y values, we say that x or y squared equals x is not a function.